Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. The penalty imposed on Red Bull by the FIA for breaching the cost cap in 2021 has been confirmed. Verstappen will keep his title, a $7 million fine, only peanuts to Red Bull. But the key point is a 10% reduction in testing time for the next 12 months. Is this a big deal? Have they got off lightly? Tweet your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Firstly, another big thing of the day was Alonso getting reinstated P7 for the US Grand Prix in Austin. If you guys don't know the story on this, of course, he ran a lot of the race after the damage. His wing mirror was loose. Eventually, it came off. Haas, after the race, said that the stewards should have given him a black and orange flag to say, look, you've got to change that or come into the pit, sort it out, maybe even retire the car. And that might well happen in the future. And that's happened to Haas a fair few times in the past, with Magnussen getting some end plate damage, asked to pit, whereas Alonso, Perez in this race were not by the stewards. They were not happy, understandably. So the stewards look into it and they said, yeah, actually, Haas, you've got a point there. We're going to give Alonso a 10-second stop and go penalty. That put him down to P15 after what is effectively a 30-second penalty. For the 10-second stop and go coming to the pits, that's what it would have been. So he was P15. Then Alpine were like, we're not happy with that. We're going to protest. Now, they protested the protest, and their protest was over the fact that Haas protested too late. So they put their protest in, Haas, 24 minutes after the deadline, and Alpine were like, well, look, it shouldn't have been deemed admissible, that protest, because like the race directors weren't going to change anything. They'd even inspected and scrutinized Alonso's car after the race and said, yep, it's all good, he gets the P7. Only because of Haas's words were they actually then taking that position away from Alonso. So Alpine were just protesting the fact that they could even consider that protest, and initially it was deemed inadmissible. They said, no, Haas's protest is upheld, you've got no idea what you're talking about. And then, like, this is just the absolute madness of Formula 1, they then request an appeal. They do a right of review. So their protest gets rejected, they then do a right of review, and then it gets accepted, which means Haas's protest is declared void, and therefore Alonso is reinstated P7. So honestly, what an absolute mess. But at the end of the day, the FIA have effectively done the right thing, I think, like rarely, and Alonso has indeed got his P7 back. So that is good news. The way they've got to that point is just unbelievable, to be honest. The fact that the stewards didn't do anything at the time. Haas say X, Alpine say, you can't say that because it was too late. And then initially they deny it, and then they say, actually, you've got a point, fair enough, we'll have to declare Haas's protest void. I mean, what an absolute shambles. But yes, at the end of the day, Alonso gets his P7 on one of his best drives, probably of his entire career, to be honest, because that was absolutely epic. So thankfully it got reinstated, and Haas are not happy because they apparently were told they had a 60-minute window to submit their protest, and they submitted it about 54 minutes into that supposed 60-minute window. Turned out there was only a 30-minute window. So Haas are now like, hang on a second, you told us this, it was actually this. Like, honestly, what is going on here? And yeah, the FIA have said that in future we need to do a better job of this, which every single weekend there's something the FIA needs to do a better job of. But that is only the first such regulations drama of the day. Let's dive into this whole Red Bull situation. So it was becoming increasingly clear that I think they were going to announce this a few days ago now, but after the death of Dietrich Mateschitz from Red Bull, they decided, let's just delay it a few days, and they were due to announce it today, as they just have. It was becoming clear that, look, Verstappen wasn't going to lose his title. They were going to go for the more sporting penalties on, let's say, the testing time side, as they have done, rather than, and let's say, okay, you get to keep Verstappen's title, we're not going to dock you any points because it was a minor breach according to the rules, but lots of people would say, well, hang on a second here, they're over the cost cap by $2.2 million. We'll see that in a second, £1.8 million, and therefore other teams are saying, well, that could have been used for a fair bit of upgrades for their car last year in 2021. So this is the official confirmation from the FIA. They have effectively, Red Bull have agreed to an accepted breach agreement. This means that Red Bull have admitted to have done wrong. I think they've got a press conference coming soon, but like they denied kind of up until now that they'd really done anything wrong here, but they've had to admit to the FIA that yes, we did go over the cost cap, we did breach the rules, and therefore, I don't know what Horner's going to say about it, but he's going to maybe have to swallow his pride to some degree, but I think they still have other explanations for the situation. Now, this is the kind of PDF here that is put out by the FIA. So they say that the accepted breach agreement was agreed to. So they reported that they'd spent 114.3 million when the FIA looked into it and audited it. They reckon that they'd actually spent an extra 5.6 million on top of that, and therefore they exceeded the cost cap by less than 5%, which is the minor sporting penalty, although people would wonder whether that's valid or not, by about £2 million, about $2.2-ish million, something in that ballpark. These are all of the things that they exceeded it on. So there's there's about 13 different things where where the FIA and Red Bull disagree in terms of their accounting. So obviously all the teams are going to try and fudge the numbers as much as they possibly can. But yeah, these are all the 13 things that Red Bull did wrong according to the FIA. And we don't know how many of these things the other teams did wrong, but they don't go over the cost gap. So that is indeed what's going to happen. And these are therefore the penalties. So Red Bull must pay a financial penalty of $7 million. Of course, that's peanuts. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter if this penalty was $100 million. Red Bull would be happy to pay it to if that was the only penalty. But it's not the only penalty. The penalty is with regard to testing time. So as is described, a minor sporting penalty in the form of a limitation to Red Bull's ability to conduct aerodynamic testing during a period of 12 months from the date of the execution of the ABA through the application of a reduction of 10% of effectively the wind tunnel testing and the computational fluid dynamics testing, which is the CFD simulator work. So yes, 10% reduction. Now, the other day we thought it was going to be, or we heard rumors of a 25%. I think it was quite clear that Red Bull were obviously not happy with that, and they had the conversations, they effectively negotiated with the FIA as to what their penalty and punishment would be. 10% is the number they've come to. So what that means is it will now be 63% of the kind of base number. And I'll explain that for you guys in a second, because that basically the higher up the grid you are, the less testing time you get next season. So that's pretty much it. A $7 million fine, a 10% reduction in development time over the next 12 months. Teams, I'm sure, will have their opinions on whether that is fair, whether it's too lenient, whether it's too far. Red Bull, I'm sure, will probably think exactly that, because, well, the implications of this, I'm not exactly well qualified enough to say, but they should be relatively significant. So I think it turns out that it was a 1.6% breach, but there was like a tax credit involved, and if that had been correctly applied, it would have been still about a £500,000 breach, about a 0.4% breach, but still, I think Hamilton said 300k gets you a new front wing, and that would have won in the championship. So that's always where these discussions are going to go on, but Red Bull get away with it to some degree. The question is this going to affect their competitiveness going forward? It will to some extent. Will it to a significant extent that the other teams want? That is the big question. So yes, over the next 12 months, they will have less opportunity to test their cars than the other teams. And the way this breaks down in terms of numbers is as follows. So by winning the Constructors' Championship, they will get 70% of the allocation. So there's an allocation number, however many hours it is for wind tunnel testing and simulation testing, and they will get 70% of that. But that actually is going to get reduced by a further 10%. So that 70% of that number goes down to 63% of that number. And of course, Ferrari and Mercedes, where they are right now in the Constructors, will have 75 and 80% respectively. So these are the overall numbers as it stands. Aston Martin, where they currently sit, will have 100% of that number, and Red Bull would have 70, but now will have 63%. So what this means is, just comparing that to the other teams, they will have approximately 16% less time than Ferrari. It's 12 percentage points, but in terms of, 63 minus 75 over 75, it's about 16%, and they'll have about 21% less time than Mercedes. So Mercedes going to the next seat. So Mercedes over the next 12 months will have about 21% more testing time than Red Bull, which is a pretty big deal, to be fair. Now, I don't exactly know how that translates in terms of lap time. The other key point here, though, is that the majority of the kind of development and testing has been done already for the RB19 or whatever it will be for next season. So you can expect that Red Bull's car at the start of next year will still be very good and might carry over some of the benefits that they've had by potentially overspending in 2021 through 2022 by hitting the cap, you'd imagine, into 2023. They're now going to have that reduction in testing time, to which point in the latter half of next season, and then potentially into the year after that in 2024, that's probably when, if there is going to be like a kind of reduction to their competitiveness, that's probably when that will come through. As I say, how much this actually means in terms of lap time and competitiveness, and whether it's an adequate penalty for what they might have gained in 2021 and what they should lose as a result of this season and next season, and potentially the season beyond that as well, because really this is only going to affect probably the second half of next year, and then in terms of like their development over time, and then also 2024. Scarborough reckons here, Craig Scarborough, that a 25% reduction would be huge, and he reckoned it would cost them a place in the top 3, which seems quite the statement. But what does he think about a 10% reduction, right? Also, if 25% is huge, then is 10% enough to make them the second best team or the second best car in a year and a half's time? I don't know. Obviously, it depends how good they are at development anyway, but that is one of the other key points, is that just in general, the teams behind them have more testing time anyway. Mercedes were already going to have an extra 12, 13% advantage or 14%-ish advantage advantage on Red Bull going into the next 12 months anyway. Now that advantage is now 21 odd percent, which isn't too far off that 25% figure that Craig Scarborough reckoned was a big deal. So yeah, I don't know what you guys think about this. It's tough from a layman's perspective to really figure out, is this fair? Is this not fair? Is this reasonable? And probably what we'll see is the Red Bull at the start of next year will still be a rocket ship, and it's like, well, it didn't really hurt them. It's probably just over time where the lack of testing time will come into play in terms of competitiveness, but there's going to be a significant lag time here in terms of when this actually starts to affect Red Bull. So, you know, by the time it starts to, they could have already locked up next season's championship theoretically. So definitely intrigued to your thoughts on that one in the comments section below. A couple of quick things to mention. Mexico has been confirmed to stay on the calendar until at least 2025. Mercedes also have removed those kind of stabilizing things on their new front wing, but it is still a new front wing in other ways. So effectively they get around what the FIA was not happy about, and they're going to run this in FP1 today and see if it's any good effectively, and see if Mercedes can be a little bit more competitive. Hamilton's also confirmed that, yeah, he's going to sign a long-term deal. Now, he was already going to compete next season already, so this evidence sounds like he's going to compete until at least 2025 potentially. So I think that's an exciting factor, because I think we still need Hamilton versus Verstappen to actually have a challenge at the front end of the grid. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.